Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I'll be analyzing the case of Peanut the Squirrel. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Mark Longo was born sometime around 1990 and was raised in Greenwich, Connecticut. He graduated from high school in 2008, went to college, and became an engineer. According to Mark, when he was in Manhattan in 2017, an eastern gray squirrel crawled up his leg after the squirrel's mother was hit by a car. Mark decided to keep the baby squirrel and took him back to Connecticut. The name he gave the squirrel was Peanut. He spelled it P-N-U-T. I refuse to spell it that way. I'm just going to write it out as Peanut, P-E-A-N-U-T. Mark's intent was to release Peanut back into the wild once the squirrel was ready. After 8 months, he set the squirrel free, but a day later, Mark noticed that Peanut lost part of his tail due to an animal attack. Believing the squirrel had not developed the necessary survival skills to live in the wild, Mark allowed Peanut to live inside his house. After adopting Peanut, Mark met a tattoo model named Daniela. She was originally from Germany and lived in Las Vegas. The couple became romantically involved and eventually married. His wife appeared to share the same high level of enthusiasm for the squirrel Peanut. Mark started social media accounts for Peanut on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. He posted various interactions with the squirrel, like the squirrel climbing on him or eating. Peanut was a major success, eventually accumulating almost 600,000 followers on Instagram. In April 2023, Mark and his wife moved to Pine City, New York. This is just north of the Pennsylvania border, not too far from Corning, New York. For $960,000, Mark purchased a 5,000 square foot house that sits on 311 acres. The property also features a couple of barns. Mark and his wife started a non-profit animal rescue called Peanut's Freedom Farm Animal Sanctuary. They have over 300 animals, including horses, dogs, cats, goats, sheep, pigs, and donkeys. The sanctuary was expensive to run. However, the revenue generated by Peanut on social media really helped. Mark said that he and his wife worked 3 jobs to earn more revenue to put toward the project. Also, Mark has an account on OnlyFans where he goes by the name Squirrel Daddy. He insists this venture is separate from the animal rescue work. In June 2024, someone dropped off a raccoon at the front door of the house. Mark named him Fred. His intent was to rehabilitate Fred and release him into the wild. Fred spent time in an outdoor enclosure and in a room inside the house. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On Wednesday, October 30, 2024, at about 10 a.m., agents from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, also known as DEC, conducted a raid on Mark's property. They had a search warrant for a squirrel and a raccoon. The raid lasted for 5 hours, during which the agents seized Peanut and Fred. During this process, Peanut allegedly bit the hand of one of the people involved in the investigation. So I guess one of the agents that took part in the raid. Both Peanut and Fred were euthanized in order to test for rabies. There are complicated and often unreliable methods for testing living animals for rabies. However, a definitive diagnosis typically requires testing conducted after the animal has been killed. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The killing of Peanut and Fred caused outrage among the public. Many people feel that the DEC did not need to be so heavy-handed. Was all this really necessary for a squirrel and a raccoon? Mark implied that a legal fight will be coming to get justice for Peanut. As far as the claim that Peanut bit the hand of an investigator, Mark has expressed skepticism, wondering how the squirrel could do this if the agent was wearing gloves. He also criticized how the agents carried out the raid. For example, he said they treated him like a terrorist, asked his wife about her immigration status, again, she was originally from Germany, asked if there were cameras in the house, prevented Mark from feeding his horses, and would not allow him to go to the bathroom without an escort. Item number 2, the New York DEC said that the raid at Peanut's Freedom Farm was in response to complaints about Fred the raccoon. The squirrel wasn't even the target. The real concern was his furry accomplice. One job of the DEC is to protect public health related to the illegal possession of wild animals which have the potential to carry the rabies virus. For over 30 years, this disease has been found in raccoons in New York's southern tier, which includes Pine City. In the state of New York, it is illegal to keep wild animals indoors as a pet. If someone has a license as a wildlife rehabilitator, they can keep an animal indoors, but only if the intent is releasing the animal into the wild someday. So when the animal is ready, when the animal has recovered, then it has to go into the wild. Mark said that he knew it was illegal to have a squirrel inside his house, but he did not have the heart to keep Peanut outside. He claimed that he was working on the paperwork to certify Peanut as an educational animal. Item number 3. After Peanut was executed by the state of New York, Mark made a post on Instagram. He said, "Well, Internet, you won." Mark explained how his house was raided and indicated how he was disgusted by the people who did this to Peanut. The squirrel was his best friend, the center of his world. He didn't know how to process this emotionally. The rescue operation that he runs is heavily dependent on Peanut for revenue, and Mark will set up a fundraiser. Mark then wrote, quote, "To the people who did this, thank you for breaking apart a family and crushing any hopes of our nonprofit to survive," unquote. Item number 4. Who is right and who is wrong in the case of Peanut and Fred? Some people say that Mark is wrong. Others point the finger at the DEC. In my opinion, both of them made mistakes. I'll start by looking at what Mark did wrong, then move to the DEC. Mark admitted that he knew it was illegal to keep a wild animal indoors. He was working on trying to legally keep Peanut in the house, but he had not accomplished that goal. If Peanut was not certified as an educational animal, he should not have been in the house. It's never a good idea to advertise an illegal activity. Putting Peanut on social media may have led to revenue, but it also notified the entire world of what Mark was doing wrong. Knowing that he was already walking on thin ice, Mark decided to let a raccoon live in his house. Raccoons have a terrible reputation as far as carrying rabies, far worse than the reputation possessed by squirrels. Raccoons are one of the primary carriers of rabies in North America. If Mark did not know this, he should have known it. When the DEC agents raided his house, Mark complained about them, which is fine, but he also complained about the people who reported his activity to DEC, trying to lay a guilt trip on them and implying they were actually mad about his clothing-challenged content on OnlyFans. Like this was never about rabies or anything like that. The people who reported him were being moralistic. In reality, whoever reported Mark was only stating what was true. His actions are what led to the problem. Mark made bad decisions. He attracted the attention of the DEC. I'm not confident that Mark has been entirely honest about everything. For instance, in various news reports, Mark supplied different stories about how many agents raided his house. In one account, he said 10 to 15 agents raided. In another, the range was from 6 to 8. Engineers are usually pretty good at math. Mark couldn't count how many people were there. He couldn't get the range down to something a little smaller. Again, 10 to 15, all the way to 6 to 8. Seems like something's not quite right there. Now looking at the wrongdoing of the DEC. Sometimes people who work for government agencies forget that taxpayers fund their operations. They fail to recognize the idea of priorities, how to spend money responsibly. Was it really worth spending all that money to send multiple agents to Pine City to execute a sneaky squirrel and a rogue raccoon? Preventing rabies is certainly a noble mission, but they could have just called Mark and said, "Hey, you cannot keep wild animals indoors." There is the sense that the agents were just looking for some excitement. They wanted to leave the office that day and do something more interesting. If that's what they wanted in a job, maybe working for the DEC wasn't the best choice. I think it was ridiculous, heavy-handed, and wasteful to conduct the raid. Peanut wasn't a maniacal squirrel intent on world domination. They treated him like a James Bond villain wielding a weapon of mass destruction. The tragedy of Peanut and Fred occurred due to a confluence of bad decisions. Mark, the squirrel whisperer, should have obeyed the law, and the DEC should have enforced the law in a reasonable manner, a way that showed how they were being responsible with money and not just looking for excitement. It would have been better if the bad behavior of the DEC was exposed by someone who was following all the rules. Mark is an imperfect candidate to challenge them. I would be very surprised if he could win any type of legal case against them. Even so, that doesn't change the wastefulness and irresponsibility demonstrated by the DEC. They have no reason to feel proud about their behavior. From Peanut's perspective, this case highlights the dangers of becoming popular on social media. He would not be the first influencer to experience a bad outcome in pursuit of fame and glory. Even the most influential squirrel is no match for the power of the state. This case had me thinking. Law enforcement agents of various types enjoy telling stories about dangerous, exciting, or interesting cases. I can envision this scenario where, say, 4 officers from different agencies are having a discussion about their recent adventures. Let's say their names are Steve, Mike, Tony, and Bill. Steve starts off the conversation with his extraordinary story. Well, I work for the FBI, and I caught a kidnapper who took a victim from one state to the other. The kidnapper had a firearm on him, and the situation was tense for a long time. Somebody could have been killed in the confrontation, but I was able to apprehend this kidnapper without any loss of life. The victim was saved. The other guys are like, wow, how frightening. Thank you for taking that kidnapper off the street and protecting innocent people. Not wanting to be outdone, Mike says, well, I'm a state trooper. I caught a serial killer who was on the way to a store to buy more chainsaws. The guys were really impressed by this. Wow, that sounds dangerous. Good job, Mike. You are keeping everyone safe. Tony is like, well, I work for the IRS, and I caught this wealthy celebrity couple who cheated on their taxes to the tune of $2 million. The guys aren't quite as impressed. They're like, that really doesn't live up to the chainsaw story, but I can see how that's important. Tax evasion hurts everyone. By stealing from the government, those people were taking money from hardworking Americans. At this point in the conversation, the guys turn their attention to Bill, who works for the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. What have you been up to recently, Bill? Maybe the guys were expecting Bill to dazzle them with a story about wrestling a bear or being attacked by a pack of coyotes. Bill sets the stage for his amazing tale. No offense, guys, but my adventure is the most exciting one here. You did a great job and all with catching bad guys, but you won't believe what I accomplished. You know how squirrels normally live in the wild? Yeah. Well, we found out that there was a squirrel living inside a house. The guys seemed disappointed. Okay, how did you handle that? Did you go into the house with a broom and shoo the squirrel out? No, we couldn't do that because the squirrel had an accomplice. Was it a tiger? Was it a lion? No, it was much worse. It was a raccoon. Furthermore, they had names. The squirrel was called Peanut, and the raccoon was called Fred. The guys have a confused look on their face. I'm not sure having names makes them more dangerous, but okay. Bill continues, yeah, things were getting really scary. On top of that, Peanut was a social media influencer who made thousands of dollars. He could have been stockpiling AK-47s as easy as he was acorns. This causes Tony to chime in. Was the squirrel paying his taxes? Bill's like, Tony, not now. I'm in the middle of a story. So we enter this house, and the squirrel attacks me. Mike says, did Peanut have a chainsaw? That's going around these days. No, Mike, no chainsaw. He bit me on the hand. The guys are like, how did you deal with that? Light him up with the taser? Or whip out the pepper spray? Oh no, we took him out of the house and executed him later. His raccoon conspirator shared the same fate. So let me get this straight. You killed both the squirrel and the raccoon. What did the raccoon do? Nothing, but you have heard the phrase, cling together, swing together. Look, it was the squirrel or me. I had to toast that Peanut. Did I mention the squirrel was a social media influencer? If a law enforcement agent is at risk for having a conversation like this, maybe it's time for them to reevaluate their career choices. Those are my thoughts in the case of Peanut the Squirrel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Just a reminder, I have an account on Patreon, which currently has over 300 pre-release videos. These videos are of the same quality as the ones I release to the public, and they stay in this mode on Patreon for a long time. It's not like I release them on Patreon and then a couple days later I release them to the public. Those videos are often on Patreon for months, if not over a year. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video.